Greetings, traveler. I am SnapJelly, and I wanted to talk about the swords of Rohan once again. Yes, because in my Lord of the Rings weapons video, I said some things that, and I blame myself for this because I didn't really explain very well, but I said some things that people disagreed about, and I wanted to address them again. So, one is the fact that I said that the swords were based off of Bronze Age swords, while people say they were based off of Viking swords. Now, this is completely my fault because I said it wrong. Alright, so I'm going to explain what I meant later in this video, but the first thing that I wanted to address is because I said that the swords of Rohan do not have guards, and that probably poses a problem. And people say, oh well, swords don't need guards. Well, they don't need guards, but the thing that bothered me was people saying, and it's happened quite a lot, they don't need guards because they're cavalry swords. Yes, I've had comments literally saying they don't need guards because they're cavalry swords. But the thing is, cavalry swords do have guards though. I mean, honestly, I'm gonna just address that first. Why do people think that cavalry swords don't have guards? Because I don't know where people get this information from, because they very much did. I mean, if you look at the Western history at least, because the only real dedicated cavalry swords that happened in the West, here in where Lord of the Rings time period is based on, were at these types of hand protection, or something along the lines, right? Now this is not a cavalry saber, it's a trooper saber, but still, the only difference between this saber and a cavalry saber of the same time period was that the cavalry saber would be a bit longer. That's it. They would have this type of hand protection. Now, if you don't call this a guard, then I would call you an idiot. Simple as that. And it had various different designs. It wasn't specifically that. I mean, the model constantly changed, but it was always something along those lines. Just a bunch of hand protection, and the hand protection just became larger and larger and larger over time. So, the idea that cavalry swords don't have guards is ridiculous. Now, you might be saying, but Jelly, that's way too late in history. If you want to base it off of Lord of the Rings, of the times that Lord of the Rings are based off, then you gotta go way back, right? Way before those swords were invented. Now, the thing is, it still doesn't hold up. I mean, just thinking about this, right? The guard exists in Lord of the Rings, because in Gondor people do have guards. Now, if you would compare that to a medieval knight, during the times that also guards existed, then they would carry swords that have guards. They would just carry arming swords or long swords like the ones they would use on foot. People think that having a crossguard limits your capabilities on horseback. But it really doesn't. I mean, honestly, there are two things that you can do when you're on horseback and have a sword. There's one, and there's two. Well, you could also do it on the other side. I guess you could thrust. I mean, like the 1908 battered saber was a dedicated thruster. So that's the thing. But honestly, that's not the point. In both cases, if you have a guard, that does not limit your capability to do those things. I mean, the only way that a guard could get in the way is if you hold the sword like this, horizontally, and strike down like that. But you don't do that, you do this. The guard is aligned with your arm. It does not get in the way. When will this get in the way? It doesn't. People, for example, also said, well, because it's based off of Nordic society, they use round center grip shields, and you can't use a guard with that. Yeah, you can. I mean, again, the guard doesn't get in the way if you use a round center grip shield. I mean, how does it? Unless you thrust like that, your guard really doesn't bother you. When will it? Just consider this as the edge of the shield, right? And I would cut like that. I mean, does my guard limit me whatsoever? No. Only if I do this, then my guard will limit me, but I'm an idiot if I do that. So, why would a guard limit you? Now, the other point that I wanted to make is that I said that they were based off of Bronze Age swords, not Viking swords. Now, this is wrong. They are based off of Viking swords. What I meant to say was they resemble in effective functionality Bronze Age swords more. And here's why. You see, a lot of people say the Viking style swords don't have guards. So it's like the Anglo-Saxon design swords. It's like the similar design. But the thing is, they didn't because it wasn't invented yet. Not because they didn't want to or because it wasn't practical. The design wasn't there yet. After the design was there, they adopted it, because this is a Viking sword. This is like a 10th, 11th century Viking sword, and as you can see, it's a guard. It's basically an arming sword. There's no real difference. Arguably, it's a bit wider than an arming sword would be, but still, even arming swords can be wide, so that's not a thing either. In time, as armor got more and more developed, people started using smaller and smaller shields. Also Vikings, so because of that, because of more armor and smaller shields, people needed other forms of protection incoming the guard. This is simply an innovation that at some point happened that is just really, really functional and really, really useful. And the Vikings adopted it as well. So that makes me wonder, if the guard exists, which it does because the people of Gondor have it, why do the people of Rohan not have it? I mean, they're very close to each other, they should know. Unless they're being stubborn, which again is stupid. And then something else is that it's not that they just don't have guards, like specifically the ones from Theoden and Eomer, they are rounded here. Right? Like actual Viking swords or Anglo-Saxon swords, they had this little nick at the very least. Right? So if anything, that would help you. But if your sword is rounded there, then it would just really, it would guide every blow towards your hand or towards your arm. That really doesn't help you. And it's not like because you're on horseback that you can't get hit in the hand anymore. If you would use a sword on horseback, you can still get your fingers chopped off. So that doesn't matter. And considering you fall off, right, because you would primarily use a spear or a lance, of course, it would break, you would fall off your horse, and you would draw your weapon, and you would want a weapon that's good in close combat. So one with a guard, if it exists, that is. Now I also mentioned that the sword from Eowyn does have a little nick in the guard there, so which is better. I mean, if anything, that's gonna help you. And it also can't really be a cultural thing because they have those little fancy horses, right? But you can still add a guard to that. It doesn't really add any weight because honestly, this guard is thicker than it needs to be. A guard doesn't really need to be thick to be effective. I mean, it's really sturdy material, as simple as that. Now, I made the connection to Bronze Age swords rather than Viking Age swords because of the potential development that Rohan lacks. You see, the Vikings adapted their weapons as time progressed, and the people of Rohan apparently didn't, because logic indicates that the Gondor swords are the developed versions of what came before, right, which was more similar to the swords of Rohan. So the people of Rohan stayed behind, deliberately, probably. Now, the only swords that have the general sword design that I can think of that deliberately did not have guards were Bronze Age swords. Now, again, the guard wasn't invented back then, and if it was, they probably would have added guards, but simply, the Vikings adapted, right? And Bronze Age swords they did not have guards, so we don't know anything about their fighting styles, really. But it must have been that they adapted their fighting style towards not having guards. That's why they used very large shields, for example. Now, arguably, this connection is not completely fair because from both Viking style and the Bronze Age whatever style, we don't actually know anything of how they were used. We can only make estimated guesses based on the weapons and armor they used. But what gets me is that they deliberately stayed behind. They focused on having a specific style of fighting that does not require a guard, or at least somehow or another. I can't think of anything because, again, having a guard doesn't limit you. There are plenty of things that a sword without a guard can't do that a sword with a guard can't. But the other way around, not really. Everything that a sword without a guard can do can also be done with a sword with a guard. So maybe it's a fantasy style or whatever. It doesn't really make sense to me. But they must have had some style that does not require a guard at all. That's the only explanation, and the only swords that I can think of that had this type of style would be Bronze Age swords, because there's nothing worth of a guard there as far as we know. The early Anglo-Saxon swords, or the stereotypical Viking swords, did have something there, and it later developed into large guards, so you can fairly say that they had a lot of hand-chopping problems. Right, so they adapted and got better hand protection. But for the Bronze Age, we just don't know. That's, in my opinion, the closest to effective fighting style that you can get with those type of weapons. But I said that they were based off of Bronze Age swords, which is not true. No, they are based off of Viking swords, but it's my fault. I said it wrong. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I think that's about everything I wanted to say. I probably forgot like 1,000 things, but I think I got the point across. So thank you for joining my quest. If you stuck around this long, you might as well subscribe. And also you can follow me on Facebook now, because I have a Facebook page, in case you didn't know yet. Yay! Facebook.com/SnapJellyArmy, link is in the description below. You can click on it to make the liking happen. You'll figure it out, you're a big boy. And thank you for joining my quest. I already said that. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.